Welcome, everybody, town board members, our presenters tonight, and I'm glad to see so many citizens have shown up. I'm Tom Flaherty. I'm the Webster Town Supervisor. And tonight, we are going to be doing a workshop presentation on 600 Ridge Road and the West Webster Hamlet in general. A couple things. Tonight's presentation, we kind of envision as being the first of a series of presentations. I'm hoping that within the next couple of months, as we get more information, we're going to be able to have a meeting where the public can take the podium or take the microphone to ask questions, and we're hoping to assemble a panel of experts that can answer those questions. I think that as this presentation goes on tonight from our presenters, I think the one thing that everybody should keep in mind is that the reason why that property looked the way it was for the last 15 years is unknown environmental issues. Those are the three words that have kept that property like this. And I want to set expectations. We know more today than we knew a year ago based on the Phase 2 environmental testing. But we still have a lot more pieces to the puzzle to figure out, as the graphics show. At the end of the presentation, as town board workshops are, if the town board members have questions or comments, they certainly can ask them of the presenters. All the reports, actually, what you're going to see tonight is basically an attempt to distill down a 400-plus page, very technical scientific report so that people such as myself, who are not scientists, which probably most of the public isn't, so they can understand it and relate to what those findings show on the site. In anticipation of our next meeting, there will be a portal opened on the town website so that citizens can submit comments and questions. And like I said, I think the next meeting will certainly have a public interaction component. The agenda for tonight is really threefold. Josh Artuso, our Director of Community Development, will give a short presentation on the history of 600 Ridge Road. And then Mary Harrington, our Town Engineer, is going to get into the meat and potatoes of this, and that is really the Phase 2 environmental and structural report findings. Mary's part of the presentation, both the time that will be spent at the podium and the number of slides that are gone over, will be the majority of Mary's. That's the main act. That's why I think people came, is to find out about the environmental. And then we'll culminate with Matt Chatfield, who is the Executive Director of the Webster Economic Development Alliance, just giving an update about the multi-pronged different strategies and efforts that are going on in the West Webster Hamlet, which is somewhat centered by the linchpin property of 600 Ridge. So without further ado, I am going to bring up Josh Artuso, our Community Development Director, to describe the history of Ridge Road. 600.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. So believe it or not, you're actually looking at some historic photos of 600 Ridge Road. As many of you may know, prior to 1980, this site was home to various commercial and retail operations. There was once a meat market, a plumbing supply store, a pizza parlor, and most recently the Webster Furniture Strippers. So the property consists, it's just under 2/10 of an acre parcel located at the northwest corner of Ridge and Gravel Roads. There are two existing structures on the site. The primary structure is a little over 3,000 square feet. It's a two-story wood frame building, and there's also a 704 square foot detached garage. The current zoning of this area is LC1, low intensity neighborhood commercial. So I'm just going to go over a brief history of the property tax and ownership from about 2006 until the present. So back in 2006, the Webster Furniture Strippers business closed abruptly, and the property was essentially abandoned by the owner. Around 2009, Monroe County initiated the tax foreclosure process due to several years of unpaid taxes. Now, there were no bidders at that auction, primarily due to the unknown environmental concerns. So the county opted not to take title to the property due to those unknown concerns. So actually, the property reverted back to the private owner at that time, and that cycle has continued for approximately an additional 10 to 12 years, annually going up for auction, not having any bidders, and the county deciding not to take ownership of the property due to the unknown environmental concerns. So it has been a crazy cycle that has repeated itself, and essentially the unpaid tax bill has continued to accumulate, and there is approximately $134,000 of unpaid property taxes. And it is important to note that the property is under private ownership. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mary Harrington, the town engineer, and she's going to give a brief summary of the Phase 2 environmental site assessment and the structural report.
Thanks, Josh. So I'm going to go over the long scientific report that we received from Day Engineering and a structural report as well on the buildings. I wanted to start out with why there is this idea that there are environmental concerns at the site. So in the timeline of 1991 to 1993, the neighboring property alerted the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation of perceived operational violations. And then following that notification, the New York State DEC, Monroe County Department of Health, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, otherwise known as the EPA, performed site visits, documented findings, and found violations. One such violation was an air emission test. The site was required to have a permit for the chemicals being used, and it was tested at 9 times the permissible limit. There was an area where I didn't have information on between 93 and 2000, but again in 2000, the business remained non-compliant with air emission permitting from New York State DEC. The DEC started a legal case against the business. The town supervisor at the time, Catherine Thomas, wrote a letter to the New York State DEC compelling them to proceed with legal action to force the business into compliance. With no action taken by the owner, the business continued to operate without permits or proper air control. And then, as Josh mentioned, in 2006, the business abruptly closed and the property was abandoned. So the Phase 2 report in itself is a complicated matter, but how did we get to the ability to have a consultant on the site and actually occupy the site and take soil samples, air samples, and things of that nature? In April of 2020, the town coordinated with the county and had a meeting in an effort to strategize how this property could achieve redevelopment. In August of 2020, the town foiled DEC for environmental records, so that was summarized on the previous slide. In January of 21, town officials met with Logier Environmental Consulting Group, a local consulting firm in the area, to discuss how to complete a Phase 1 and a Phase 2 testing report at the site. Because the property was still under private ownership, the town was able to obtain access by that private owner and enter the building to see if it was safe enough for this report to be completed. It was deemed safe to enter. In March of '21, at a town board workshop, Logier presented a proposal to complete Phase 1 and 2 testing. But discussion by the board determined that it was not prudent to place the town in a position of liability should environmental testing results manifest in expensive and immediate remediation on a privately owned property. In May of 2021, the property exchanged hands, and the town has attempted to contact the new owner with no response. In November of 2021 through May of 2022, town and county legal counsels discussed how to file a motion for temporary control of the site through the Supreme Court. In October of last year, a judge granted temporary control to Monroe County, not the town. A Phase 2 environmental site assessment contract was executed with the county's consultant, Day Engineering, which the town reimbursed the county in full for. Over the course of November of last year through March of this year, the field investigation was completed, a report was completed, and the town and county reviewed its contents. Once the report was submitted to the judge, it ended the county's access to the property. So what is an environmental site assessment? There's 3 different types. A Phase 1 is non-intrusive, comprehensive examination to identify recognized environmental conditions, also known as RECs. It does not confirm the presence or absence of contamination, rather it assesses the potential for contamination. A Phase 2 is conducted typically after a Phase 1. The purpose is to determine if there is actual contamination present, but it does not quantify the extent of the contamination. Typically, during a Phase 2, soil vapor testing, drilling or excavating to collect samples of soil and groundwater, and testing for hazardous materials occurs. A Phase 3 is more comprehensive than a Phase 2, and typically involves more sampling, analysis, and reporting, to the point where you could determine the nature and extent of contamination at a property and develop a remediation plan to clean up any contamination. What the town had completed was a Phase 2. So during the Phase 2, the following fieldwork was completed: surface soil evaluation, subsurface soil evaluation, monitoring well sampling, sub-slab vapor screening, a drain evaluation, a building materials survey, and a structural assessment. Day Engineering completed the first part. Watts Architecture and Engineering completed the building materials survey. And J. Scriffeth Engineering completed the structural assessment. Before we move on, I wanted to clarify what some of the terms being used mean. So the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has determined what level of contamination is allowable based on the property use. An unrestricted use. Land may be used and developed without any imposed environmental restrictions. This is, for example, an agricultural use. A residential use is a category which allows a site to be used for any other use other than raising livestock or producing animal products for human consumption. For example, single-family housing. Commercial use, land may be used only for the purpose of buying, selling, or trading of merchandise or services. Limited redevelopment without remediation. For example, a retail store or a service provider. And then soil cleanup objectives, also known as SCOs, the level of contamination allowable based on the proposed use of land. So for each of these different types of uses, we're focusing tonight on unrestricted or commercial. There is a soil cleanup objective, which is a threshold of how much contamination could be there to use the land in that function. So I know the map is a little bit challenging to read, but hopefully when you get home later this week, you could look at the slideshow. But I'm going to start with the soil evaluation. So this was a combination of real-time VOC monitoring, volatile organic compounds, and then laboratory analytical of soil samples that tested for VOCs, SVOCs, semi-volatile organic compounds, metals, and PCBs. The map to the right, when you do have a chance to look at it closer, identifies different areas where soil testing was completed on the site. So, and then I gave a little legend for what the different notations mean at the bottom. So when they looked at the soil in the field, they used a piece of equipment to get real-time readings on the level of VOCs that were detected in the air. So a helpful definition is parts per billion is ppb, and parts per million is ppm. So they'll be referenced on subsequent slides. As a result, the main building basement read no evidence of VOCs. And the exterior at SS1, as indicated on the map, which is located between the main building and the garage, VOC rate ranged from 0 to 76 parts per billion. At location SS2, surface soil 2, north of the garage, VOCs ranged from 29 to 5,160 parts per billion. To put this in perspective, a low-level alarm on the piece of equipment shown on the previous slide is 10,000 parts per billion, and a high-level alarm is 25,000 parts per billion. So the surface readings of the soil were both far below either the low or the high alarm. So walking past the site or within the site, you wouldn't be exposed to a VOC vapor reading that would be alarming to this industry. Also taken were VOC readings as they took the soil out of the ground. So when they completed bores, they took soil samples where there was staining or other indication of contamination. I want you to note the depth of these locations of the soil tests. There are readings that are higher than the high-level alarm that were taken at the site as they extracted soil from the earth. Specifically, TB3 was taken at a depth of 19 feet. So this isn't anything that you'd be exposed to walking by the property, however it was found deep in the ground. Similarly, TB6 was found to be over the limit, and that again was at 15.5 feet deep. To put this into perspective in another way, if you were to open a Sharpie, nail polish remover, or be near gasoline, you'd be exposed to over 500 parts per million of VOCs. So while it is obviously not good to have 492 VOCs come out of the earth, we are exposed to these VOCs in day-to-day life, but just not at a constant, but hopefully not constantly. So now I'm going to go into what was tested at the lab when they collected these soil samples. When they tested for VOCs in the actual soil, there was only one sample from inside the garage that detected the VOC methylene chloride exceeding the unrestricted SCO. So as I mentioned before, the unrestricted SCO would be if the land was used for single-family use. However, it is much lower than the commercial threshold for this organic compound, which is 500 parts per million. When testing for SVOCs, these are semi-volatile organic compounds. Some examples are formaldehyde, acetone, ether, or DDT. No samples tested were detected concentrations greater than the unrestricted SCO. They tested for metals in samples. One metal that was detected that exceeded the thresholds was lead. 3 samples detected elevated levels. 2 exceeded the unrestricted SCO, 1 at a depth of 4 to 6 feet, another at a depth of 2 to 4 feet. A third exceeded the commercial SCO at a depth of 0 to 6 inches. So if the site were to be used for something commercial or unrestricted, these contaminants were located anywhere from 6 inches to 6 feet down. Mercury was also detected. It was only elevated above the unrestricted SCO, and it was at a depth of 6 feet or less. The final tests to the soils were for PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, which is a man-made organic compound which has been banned since 1979 and has been used in materials such as Teflon. One sample from inside the garage tested positive, and it was located at a depth of 4 to 6 feet. In summary, soil testing identified contaminants to a depth of 6 feet. There were soil tests taken on soils that were deeper in the earth, where there was staining, but they did not come back with anything above the unrestricted SCO. All of them were below the commercial SCO concentration, apart from lead in a surface sample that was less than 6 inches from the surface. Monitoring wells were installed in 3 of the test bores with the intention of collecting water samples from 3 locations. This was to both test for contaminants and triangulate groundwater flow patterns to determine what may be entering or leaving the site. In November of 2022, monitoring well 1, which was 17.3 feet deep, encountered groundwater. Petroleum-based VOC compounds and lead were detected, exceeding New York State DEC concentration guidance. Monitoring well 2, 16.3 feet deep, and monitoring well 3, 16 feet deep, did not encounter water, so sampling was not able to be had. In January of 2023, with snow melt, we thought that maybe the groundwater table had risen and maybe we'd have more success in our sampling. We went back and had monitoring well 1 sampled again, and again, petroleum-based VOC compounds were detected and exceeded New York State DEC concentration guidance. Monitoring well 2 encountered groundwater this time, and no contaminants were detected. Monitoring well 3 again did not encounter water, and the depth of these wells was limited due to the encountering of bedrock. So if wells were installed at a deeper depth, it would take a more powerful piece of equipment to get through the bedrock. Subslab vapor screening was completed. So this is where you take a piece of a slab and you see what vapors have come up through the soils beneath that slab. So one sample was taken under the building basement slab. No constituents detected at concentrations greater than air guidance and or 90th percentile of New York State DOH guidance, which are the 2 standard guidances in this industry. 2 samples were taken under the garage floor. 6 constituents detected at concentrations greater than these 2 guidances. Methylene chloride, which is a paint stripper, acetone, a paint remover, carbon disulfide, which softens paints and varnishes, chloroform, a solvent for lacquers, polish, and resin, hexane, a solvent and cleaning agent, and toluene, which is used in the manufacturing of paint and liqueurs. So these all make sense for why they were in that garage. A drain evaluation was completed. There was a drain in the garage and a drain in the building basement that were attempted to be traced. The garage drain was clogged and was unsuccessful in tracing. The basement drain was successfully traced to a sanitary manhole nearby, which means it isn't entering the natural waterways and is going to the treatment plant for treatment should anything have ever been put down that drain. A materials survey was conducted inside the buildings. Asbestos was tested for, and much of the pipe insulation, flooring, mastics, glazings, and caulks were found to contain asbestos, as is predictable in a building of this age. Lead-based paint, again, tested positive in many areas because of the age. And PCBs were tested. No items detected levels exceeding 50 parts per million and therefore would not require special handling and disposal. A structural assessment was completed. These are photos from inside the building recently. The main building is structurally sound. It requires repair and replacement of components, but is very salvageable. And the garage is recommended for demolition. So the next steps. In Day Engineering's report, they recommended installation of a vapor mitigation system similar to a household radon system that would help treat any vapors that came up through the subsurface. Installation of additional monitoring wells to triangulate the groundwater movement. Characterization of fill samples. Additional materials testing for asbestos and lead paint. And developing a remediation and/or site mitigation plan. Challenges to complete this today. It's under private ownership, and the county's temporary court-ordered control has expired. So I would also say that completing a Phase 1 ESA is recommended. Typically, a Phase 1 comes before a Phase 2, but because of the DEC documents obtained by the town, there was reasonable information to go right to a Phase 2. However, a Phase 1 would review the neighboring properties and any potential impacts that they may have had to 600 Ridge Road. It is believed that a gas station dispensing petroleum products and leaded gasoline may have existed on the property to the west, perhaps explaining some of the results of the testing. The petroleum and lead that was encountered was very deep in the ground. The VOCs that were read were from samples very deep in the ground near the water table. And typically how contaminants move from one site to another is it migrates down through the soils to the water table and then moves with the water table to wherever it's flowing. So it's possible that some of the things encountered at 600 Ridge Road did not start at 600 Ridge Road. Also recommended is completing a Phase 3 environmental site assessment. This would quantify the extent of impact to the site and develop a plan for remediation and would incorporate Day Engineering's recommendations. Again, the challenge to complete this now is that it is privately owned and the county's temporary court-ordered control has expired. I'm glad to see you're all still awake. I know it's a little bit technical, but I'm going to pass it over to Matt Chatfield for the Hamlet revitalization update.
Thank you, Mary. I'd like to commend Mary for taking a 300 to 400 page document and distilling it down to about 25 slides that most people can be able to understand. So that's quite an effort. As you know, there's been multiple levels of investigation and activity taking place in the West Webster Hamlet. Our efforts at 600 Ridge are at the epicenter of the hamlet itself, but there's multiple layers of initiatives currently taking place. So the Hamlet Master Plan and additional property rehabilitation efforts are taking place simultaneously to the efforts that the town is undertaking at 600 Ridge. So for those of you who are familiar, this should be not new to you, but in 2021, the town was awarded $90,000 to help develop a master plan for the hamlet. So taking a bigger step back, right, a more global perspective on how can we revitalize this part of our community. And that planning study should be complete here in the next month or so. And the final recommendations were on display a few weeks back at a public open house that took place at Finn Park. So the results of that will be made available. And the goal of this effort is to identify recommendations moving forward for not just 600 Ridge, but all the properties surrounding it, and then build momentum. And of course, put the town in a great position to apply for funding from state and federal partners. In addition, the town recently applied for about $1.8 million in direct funding for the rehabilitation of targeted properties within the hamlet. And there's 4 properties, including number 1 there, which is 600 Ridge. There's 4 properties in total that surround the intersection of Gravel and and Old Ridge Road, and that's the epicenter of revitalization efforts in hopes that growth and investment will spread from there. And maybe some of you may be asking, well, why not just demolish that old building? Why rehabilitate it? Well, there's good arguments potentially for either direction. The goal of rehabilitating the property is twofold. First of all, the urban form of that little hamlet with the 4 buildings, each of the sides of the intersection being bookended essentially by a structure, creates that sense of place that it is a viable little community, a village-like center. Tearing down a building and having that be open and vacant would detract from potential revitalization efforts. Although it may help eliminate an eyesore immediately, in the long term it may actually be a detriment to the overall growth and revitalization of the hamlet. Second of all, in order to redevelop that site, the site's just too small to be have any sort of viable redevelopment take place that could be funded and basically be bankable and have a return on investment. So the existing structure has been identified for rehab. So the next steps in this bigger picture, Mary talked about the next steps on the environmental side, but next steps for the overall revitalization. We need to identify what the environmental next steps are, right? So what additional information do we need for a remedial plan? And Mary went over that. Phase 1, phase 3, so we know what those next steps are. In addition, Mary constantly related that the property is still privately owned, right? The property owner is absentee. They have not been willful in their involvement in revitalizing the hamlet or investing in their property. So we need a path forward to identify a new owner or a new title holder of that property that will be a willing and viable partner in this effort. Assembling funding sources, the Webster Economic Development Alliance, that's where we come in. We apply for funding on behalf of the town at a host of different levels, federal and state. So we're trying to assemble a funding package to bring implementation to the front. And then implementing the Hamlet Master Plan, we're thinking first steps are going to be some streetscape improvements on Old Ridge Road and gravel. That's the first available funding source that would likely be available starting in October of this year. And then obviously continuing to encourage investment within the community by the existing property owners. And with that, we're actually going to open it up to any questions.
I want to thank everyone.
You on?
Yeah, I'm on. Can you hear me? I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to comment to thank the team for all the work that they've done. I know that this particular area in this particular house in question has been looked at for many, many years, and it's very, very nice to see that we're moving forward towards the end goal. So thank you all for everything that you've done.
Councilman Cahill said, and I want to certainly thank all of you for presenting tonight. Mary, you did a tremendous job at making sense out of that 400-page document. I was educated tonight as well. Matt, I want to reach out and thank you for all that you've done thus far in securing funding to get us this far. And I think it's important for everyone who's watching to realize just what a task it has been to get us to this point, from where we've been for several years with sort of handcuffed and not being able to do anything, that we were able to reach out and strike a partnership with the county to get us to at least identifying some of what's there. And of course, taking that big unknown out of the picture hopefully will help us to move forward. Certainly there's more work to be done. And I look forward to seeing what comes next. Thank you.
Well, I just want to commend, Mary, Josh, and Chad, too, sorry, for all your works. And I want to thank you, everyone here that come and to hear our presentation. It's a long time coming, and, all the hard work really do pay off, and I thank you for all the patience that the community are giving us so that we can do our diligent works to help our community. Thank you.
No questions at this time, but I want to appreciate all the work you've done, and we'll see what we can do about the ownership issue.
Again, echo the other comments about regarding the presentation and the three presenters. Thank you very much. Great job. Made everything hopefully understandable. I do have one question. Where is the well number 1 located on the property?
It's pretty central to it. Matt's getting it. It's in between the main building and the garage. The highest highlighted area between the main building and the garage, below the north arrow.
Okay. I do have a comment also I'd like to make. I'd like to underscore the fact that the town does not have any ownership of this property. We do not have the right to even enter onto the property to do any work. The county received the order. It's an unusual process, but the county did receive an order granting a temporary incidence of ownership, which enabled the Day Engineering and the others to go in and do their sampling and testing. But at this point, not only do we not have ownership, we don't even have the right to go on the property. So I think it needs to be underscored. It's been a very long process, as you can see. I'm glad Josh started back in 2006 showing that the prior owner just abandoned the property, didn't pay the taxes, and walked away. And the town has been trying to figure out a way to deal with it, and we've done, not we, but the town administration and department heads have done quite a great job, and also Matt, I would like to include him, done a great job in moving this forward, but there's a lot to be done. We're only, I don't know, a small way through at this point, so anyway, thank you again, all of you.
And I'd just like to say, I mean, I've been working with Mary and Josh and Matt on this for some time, and I go back to the beginning when I was up on the podium a half an hour ago. The unknown environmental issue, I think for people who are in attendance tonight or anybody that watches this tape in the future, there's a big milestone that was accomplished by this Phase 2 testing in November and January. It is not unknown anymore. And I know that over the years there's been, a lot of concern about what exactly is there. We have a pretty good idea now of what is there, but we don't have a definitive answer, really, to tell you the truth, about some of it, the petroleum-based, the lead that's deep in the soils and in the water, and the petroleum. Did it generate at 600 Ridge, or is it coming in from an old oil tank that's at an adjacent property? And that's why there's more work that needs to be done, and we have to, kind of gather the troops here in the town and the various partners we've been working with to figure out what the best path forward is, especially as we dovetail toward September of this year, because there is another Monroe County real estate tax foreclosure auction, and I got to give Mary credit for this. The one slide where it had the Looney Tune, the circular logic, do you remember that? Private property, no paid taxes, unknown environmental, goes back to the person. 15+ years that went on. And I'd like to think what just transpired in the last few months will maybe help us get to September, which is, 5 months away, Charlie, where our continued efforts with the county might manifest who that next owner is, who is willing to go in and invest, and also what funding they can get to go in to rehabilitate and also to remediate, whether that's going to be scraping 6 inches of soil or whether that's going to be more. We just don't know yet. But for anybody in the audience or anybody watching this, if they've had huge concerns over the years, and some people have voiced to me they have, it is not as bad as I think some people had made it out to be. But it's certainly, I don't want to minimize that. I'm sure that there is going to ultimately have to be some type of remediation as that property moves forward. And I can't stress this enough, and Matt, you did a wonderful job explaining all the parallel things going on for what is really a whole neighborhood revitalization. But I think we would all agree that you're really, I call it perfuming the pig on neighborhood revitalization if you don't hit on 600 Ridge. That's a linchpin. And unless that property is resolved, then the rest of that revitalization is really never going to, get traction, because investors and private money, they're just not going to come in and put in a street of shops and all that stuff when that is sitting there. So I'll get off my soapbox, and I really appreciate for the crowd that was here tonight being understanding of why we wanted a workshop setting. Because even if you did ask a lot of questions, you want to really be frustrated, we'd be sitting here probably answering, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know. So I want to, I just want to be very upfront with that. There is a lot we don't know right now, but there's a lot more we know than we did a year ago. And by the time we have our next follow-up meeting, stay tuned. We're hoping that in a couple of months, we can get a panel of experts up here to answer the public's questions. Whether that panel is someone from the New York State DEC or the federal EPA or the New York State or Monroe County Health Department. Those are people that could probably answer the public's questions about this much better than, I hate to say it, than Mary, Josh, Matt, or myself, or anybody on this panel. That's not our expertise. So give us some time to talk to those people and see if we can put together something in a couple of months that will have public interaction. So with that, I want to thank the presenters. I want to thank the board. I want to thank everybody who came. And that concludes our workshop for the evening. And be on the lookout. It'll be on the website, I think, Karen, and on social media, the 400-page report from Day Engineering. If you have insomnia, try to read that. But also this approximate 30-page PowerPoint will be there. And certainly, as Mary said, on your own screen or printing out the map that's up there, I think it'll be easier for you to follow. And by all means, take advantage before the next meeting of sending us questions and comments. The more public questions and comments before the next meeting, the better we're prepared to have a meeting that answers those for the public. So, thank you.